Firstly, thank you everybody for coming along today and making the time and getting set your alarm clocks a little bit earlier and getting through the not so great weather out there. So appreciate you getting here very early. My name's Hitesh. I'm the Regional VP for EMEA for Samba TV. For those of you who don't know Samba, we're a data and analytics business. We basically capture viewing data from smart TVs, millions of them around the world, and we use that data to develop capabilities for brands and broadcasters around cross-screen targeting, measurement and attribution. We have a great panel here lined up, so you'll be pleased you came along early. Before we do that, just to kind of set the scene a little bit, I'm going to run through a few slides, so just give you some background really. So hopefully we all agree that advertising works. If you don't, I guess you must just be here for the free breakfast, right? There's been lots and lots of studies to demonstrate that, obviously, you know, the whole session's around that. But, you know, as kind of media becomes much more complicated, much more complex, how does it work in a cross-platform world? I think more than ever before, people are connected 24/7. They're connected to media, you know, day or night, home, out on the move, etc. And they're bombarded with commercial messages. From a marketer's point of view, this creates a puzzle, right? It's, you know, what drove results, what drove business outcomes, what makes things work? I think it's fair to say in the last few years, some of the larger tech platforms, and I won't reference them, have benefited from, you know, kind of sort of last touch attribution, last click attribution, probably to some extent unfairly. And yet TV continues to be really strong, right? You know, spend continues to grow. We've seen, if those of you who were here yesterday, big brands continuing to reinvest more and more money into television. So, you know, it's not just the digital, it's TV, there's lots of other platforms. I guess the real answer is that, you know, multiple platforms deliver results. This is just highlights from a study. There was a US attribution and analytics business called Analytic Partners, carried out a pretty big study, 3,000 plus campaigns across 5 years, just looking at how ROI was delivered across platforms. And not surprisingly, the more platforms you use, the better the ROI. Obviously, you've got diminishing returns after some point, but, you know, the vast majority of campaigns used 2, 3, 4 platforms. Within that, they also looked at kind of which platforms delivered the best results, and TV plus digital drove significantly higher ROI than any other combinations. I think not really surprising. When you think about these two media, they dominate media usage across the day. These are UK stats, but TV, despite all the doom and gloom over the last few years, continues to deliver nearly 3.5 hours of viewing on average every day. Digital grows from strength to strength. The big news in digital is the growth in mobile, which is now more than 60% of time spent online. So, you know, not surprisingly, they're delivering great results. I guess the TV, or the challenge for TV really, is that the behavior around viewing and consuming and discovering content has changed. So tech has enabled people to find content in different ways, view it whenever they want to, you know, time shifting, on demand, the growth in SVOD services. From a marketer's perspective, that's a challenge. TV is a big driver of their business outcomes, yet, you know, they don't know exactly how, or there are some complexities around how it's being consumed that perhaps weren't the case a few years ago. TV is basically misunderstood. It's the least understood of the media, really. You know, considering how big it is, we know probably the least about it. If you compare that to digital, where the granularity of data available is huge, right? There's so much you can learn about digital. TV, much more challenging. An example of that is from this slide here. So at Barb, when they're measuring content, measuring commercials, have a pot they call unmatched. This is basically activity on the TV that they don't know what's happening, right? It's not registered on their kind of set-top box devices. Anecdotally, this is going to be SVOD, it's going to be kind of gaming, it's going to be watching YouTube on the television, but this is stuff that, frankly, we're not determined by Barb at the moment. If you look at how it breaks out, for individuals, and all individuals, it's 17%. If you go to the younger audiences, it's 35%. So that's a big chunk of activity which currently isn't understood. I guess the point is I'm not trying to diss the measurement businesses here. I guess I think they do a great job, but they could probably benefit, and the industry of TV could benefit from just getting more incremental data sources to try and plug some of these gaps in knowledge and data. And we'll be discussing this on the panel for sure. The other kind of phenomenon is around multi-screening. So for those of you who saw the IAB Real Living study, which was published last year, they looked at kind of what people were doing whilst watching television. And not really surprisingly, you know, a big chunk of people were multi-screening using a mobile device or a laptop or a tablet. 70% of all adults. This rose to nearly 90% for younger audiences. So, there's a battle for attention going on within the living room, as well as kind of the fragmentation on the screen. And from Samba's perspective, there's two things of fragmentation. One is around fragmentation of TV viewing, and the other element is fragmentation of people's attention whilst watching television. Our view is that data and analytics can help brands and agencies navigate this area. And to that end, we've built a platform that helps, we hope, do that. I'll touch on this very briefly. This is not a sales pitch, but just to give you an idea of what we're doing. So we've built a platform which is kind of two areas. One's around audiences, so understanding TV viewing, TV audiences, and being able to deliver cross-screen advertising to them across other platforms. And there's analytics, which is basically looking at how TV plus digital can drive business outcomes. Again, more detail if you want from me later on. Just going to finish off on how we do this. So we have software built into the hardware of smart TVs, millions of them around the world, and this software can recognize what's being viewed on the screen in real time, regardless of the source of the content. It could be live through an aerial, through any set-top box, so BT, Sky, Virgin, Freeview. SVOD apps, so Netflix, Amazon Prime, and so on, and even video games. If people are playing console game titles, we can recognize that on the screen. So pretty much any commercial content that's professionally produced, and we can recognize on the screen. The other element is we built a very deterministic device map of household devices that connect to the same IP address as the TV, i.e. people in the household with their laptops, tablets, mobiles. And with that kind of infrastructure, we can deliver activation across screen, from TV to digital, and measurement and attribution products. We've done a lot with brands in the US and the UK in the kind of cross-screen world. We've got a bunch of people here who I'm excited to say are going to be sharing much more insight around this area. So I'm going to join the panel now and moderate it. If you could introduce yourselves while I do that, that would be great. Thank you. Ruth?
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's Ruth. I run the planning team at Mindshare here in the UK.
Morning, I'm David Fisher. I'm Vice President for Digital Advertising for Discovery and Eurosport. So that's a pan-European responsibility. And before that, I worked at Sky, launching Sky Advance, so very much in this space.
Good morning, my name is Aidan Feynman. I run strategy and business development for Samba TV. I joined the company a little over 6 years ago to help commercialize the technology and work on our strategic partnerships with hardware manufacturers, platforms, and broadcasters.
Hi, I'm Jason Jutla. I head up the display team at Essence in London, who's a group home agency, and my ground is in programmatic, so I set up programmatic teams in London and in Singapore.
Okay, so we've got a good mix here of kind of buy-side, sell-side, digital experience, TV experience, US, UK, everything, really. I'm going to start out, really. I mean, the slides I kind of walked through earlier talked about, TV plus digital equals better results, better ROI. There are a number of brands now looking at doing, kind of sort of activity which might be synchronized whilst things are going on television screen, or delivering commercial messages after the event, whether it's hours, days, or weeks after content or commercials appeared on the screen. There's a lot of buzz around this. Does this work? What's your feeling on this, Ruth?
We're doing quite a bit of work around that. Some of it with you, as you know, with brands like 3, around the Go Binge proposition, identifying audiences that have certain affinity, in this case to travel, and then being able to target them with the right type of content across multi-screen and in specific time periods. We've done also quite a bit of work with booking around that, seeing excellent results as well. Some of our proprietary solutions for some of these things as well. But I think in general, being able to piece the audience much better, and to your point around the attention fragmentation, being able to catch them where they are at that precise moment becomes incredibly important to ensure that the brand message resonates and stays present in their mind.
Do you think there's kinds of content or commercials that are more relevant to do this for?
Yeah, I think definitely it depends on the proposition. I think 3 is a great example of that. We could have gone with a product proposition when it came to the creative. Off of the insights that we had on the audience, we found that there was that affinity with travel that aligned very well with the proposition. And so actually using a different creative treatment and also a different context to distribute that message became much more important and actually helped us deliver a much more impactful campaign. for the client if we had gone through a very functional message about the proposition in terms of benefits rather than connected with a much broader value that 3 as a brand was bringing to them. I would argue that regardless of TV synchronization or not, we probably wouldn't have had the cut through that we had with the campaign.
Okay.
Doing it the other way.
Thank you. JJ, so Essence are kind of a unique agency, really. You come from a digital background and are now bringing in-house more kind of non-digital experience and accounts and business, basically. So you're almost looking at this the other way around, potentially, kind of digital that's existing, syncing with TV or working with TV. What's your thoughts around that?
Obviously, coming from a different viewpoint, there are probably more options for us in the digital space to be able to take that planning insight and activate it across behaviours. However, some of the pillars that Ruth spoke about actually hold true. I think that we think about solutions like this from two aspects. One is the user experience. How do we leverage the best creative? What's that right creative? And how do we start feeding different parts of the campaign and the insights that we gather from there to start changing our media? And the second is better informing our planning insights. So not only are we having in tradition what we would do is take tools that are isolated from media activation and look at them, build up an audience profile, and then try to map it in spaces where we think are most relevant. And we have great tools and they're great providers in the digital space. I think being able to leverage some of the consumption, and definitely touching on some of the slides that you showed up earlier, really starts to help us build a better picture and actually bring audience identification, which we can use cross-screen.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. A lot of people like to talk about syncing, and syncing sounds cool, but I think the reality is taking TV data and using that to inform your digital buys, either to extend the story. I mean, TV is still a great place to start the story, but there are other platforms that are better mediums to take action, right? So taking TV to start that story and then continuing that story across mobile and digital is, I think, a strategy that's worked well for clients in the US. And it's not necessarily, you don't have to hit them within 3 seconds or 5 seconds, but it's using TV data to either augment reach frequency or continue that storyboarding.
Okay. David, the broadcaster perspective. So, I mean, you already, I imagine, develop cross-screen stuff through sponsorships, right? So running on-air activity, digital activity, perhaps other stuff as well. How do you take this kind of scenario?
Well, I think that as a broadcaster, we firmly believe, and I think I couldn't really see, I think your slides were saying the same sort of thing, that TV advertising we know is incredibly effective. And for us, when we're working with advertisers and we're developing a lot of positive equity for them, whether it's advertising or sponsorship, we want to be able to continue that journey with them, and for that equity to have value beyond that, that immediacy of the TV sponsorship or the TV ad. And so if we can then take that, and we can take a sponsorship campaign of somebody who's worked with us across, an on-air sponsorship and delivered, we've generated a real perception change or a real affinity. How can we then take that further down the funnel? So I think for us, it's a lot about, we don't want to just be in the awareness space and the perception, the brand perception space. We want to help people do more things with the power of TV. And if we can link TV and digital together and there's a deterministic link between the audiences, then I think we can do that. So we get to deliver more than one type of campaign.
What challenges do you see when you're trying to do that?
I mean, I think that there are challenges with, frankly, agency adoption, because the model doesn't always necessarily work with how the agencies want to work. But I think that once you show the power of the opportunity, I think that you tend to find a way through that stuff. But I think that's an interesting question for the agency guys on the panel. I think the other elements are generating scale of audience and making sure that there is enough deterministic data in it. And then for us, as a pan-European broadcaster, it's a pan-European challenge. So how do we do that in enough markets and generate enough scale? And then as a TV company, where frankly attribution and analytics have been less our game, it's how do we deliver that? How do we think about that space?
Okay. I mean, one of the points that came up yesterday for a number of brands was that they're looking at TV now, but they're also looking at video. But reach and frequency across both of those is a real challenge, right? It's very much been built up in silos over the years. Most brand people I speak to now are struggling to kind of reconcile the two. What, guys, do you think is required to help us overcome that challenge, really?
Yeah, from my perspective, I think we need to be very clear of the difference between content and distribution for some of these things. And I think a lot of the conversations that I hear around TV, they tend to muddle the water. So they're confusing a content proposition, so the programming, the context that we would be taking into account from a planning perspective with the means of distribution of that content. And I think, from our perspective as part of Group M and some of the research that we have done, you need to split those two, because from a distribution perspective, there are changing habits in terms of how people are consuming that content, right?
Yeah.
Now, from a brand's perspective, the context that content, the programming provides to us is incredibly important in being able to put that message through at the right time and with the right mindset for those potential consumers. So, in my point of view, solutions and the investments that we've done in things like Finecast, for example, are starting to help us piece out that distribution mechanism much more holistically, so we can start looking into reach and frequency in a more complete way. Now, that doesn't mean that some of the choices that we'll make across those different distribution points from a context perspective, so what is the content that we place right next to that brand message, are going to always be the same, because it may not be the right choice for, let's say, a mobile device on the go to choose that particular programming at that point in time from a distribution perspective. So I think from my point of view, we are getting there. There's still obviously early doors in terms of how you do piece that picture together. And to your point, a lot of the means that we have today are probabilistic. Yeah. And I think 2018 is going to be incredibly interesting in terms of identity, right? As GDPR and e-privacy throw more challenges to us in that space. But I at the end of the day, you have to think of the consumer experience, whether that connective tissue is there or not. And as a brand, you need to try to provide the best consumer experience and the best value add so that they respond to your brand accordingly. And I think we've almost been too obsessed with the connective tissue and forgotten about that consumer experience, particularly within the programmatic space. So I think for me, this is a great opportunity for us to rethink how we package things a little bit better to make it a better value for the end.
I think that the data is there now, isn't it, to do reach extension. So if you can find audiences that have not been exposed, you can deliver some, supposed reach extension. But if you're thinking about just individual broadcasters, that challenge between TV and digital reach and deduplication is really thorny, and especially when you're trying to deliver it across multiple markets. Yeah. We've seen how long Dovetail's taken in the UK. So I think Ruth's point is exactly right. You're probably using video with a much lower ad load. You should be thinking about it for a different reason than a big, heavier TV ratings campaign.
I mean, with Discovery and with Eurosport, you have things like Eurosport Player, and you have obviously the Eurosport channel. I mean, that's going to be a big deal come the Olympics.
Yeah.
How are you going to manage that? You've got these two huge platforms, and you don't necessarily know whether it's the same people, whether it's different people.
Yeah, I mean, at heart, we just don't, and I think we accept that. I think, but we're on a journey to change that. So, Pyeongchang Olympics in February, we'll be broadcasting an untold amount of content for that, but we'll be treating the platforms pretty distinctly. Come Tokyo in 2 years' time, I would much prefer that we were delivering TV ad campaigns and sponsorship campaigns where we could deliver a combined audience, and that if one was underperforming, we could deliver in the other. And I think we'll have a view of how to do that in certain markets for 2 years' time. But anyone who says they're there now isn't.
Fair enough. I'm glad you said Pyeongchang, by the way, because Aden, I mean, in the US, this is another challenge that's been coming up with broadcasters. Have we had any sort of interactions around that area?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the broadcasters are seeing their ratings by kind of traditional definitions declining over the last few years. Most recently, ESPN was an example where they, by Nielsen's definition, their ratings have been declining the last couple of years. But the reality was that they're not getting credit for this massive amount of consumption that's happening on other devices, and I think that's just a shortfall of the kind of more traditional panel-based measurement solutions. And it's one of the reasons that Disney invested in Samba to put our SDK into all of ESPN's mobile, tablet apps, as well as on their sites, to get a kind of a more holistic understanding of what is this kind of true reach and frequency, and what does content consumption look like, what are the overlaps in consumption between the different platforms, and then in the long run, how do you optimize that for better performance?
Okay. Within all of that, there's the challenge around some of the walled gardens, and I think this is probably or potentially coming down the road when some of the larger tech companies potentially win the rights for some big TV content, right? And when that happens, so I'll put it out there, but people like Amazon getting the Premiership rights, for example, they could do that in a heartbeat, frankly. If that were to happen or something similar, what impact do you think that would have for the industry? Obviously, David.
Well, if it did happen, I don't think they would be going for a full package of 150 games. I think you'd be talking about a singular package. I think we saw Jill from Enders yesterday. I think it was explaining why they probably won't. If they do, then I think it's got ramifications in terms of rights, subscription, you name it. We would then have to understand what an advertising model was around it. So, if they did put an advertising model around it, I think the same challenges apply to us there that go around their other, any other advertising model. So they've put ads around stuff in the States, haven't they? And the attribution links very clearly to their retail source, and that's a challenge. I think that we have to see that as healthy competition. I don't think we should just be thinking, life's over, TV's dead. I think we have to look at that and say, how do we replicate that? How do we take whatever of that is best in breed and deliver that for ourselves? We know that if they did do that, their biggest challenge would be creating a genuine broadcast proposition that people wanted to watch. If we won it, not that we're bidding for it, by the way, then we would be able to turn that around fairly overnight, because it's what we do. We couldn't turn the retail analytics point overnight, but they could. So I think we all have different strengths.
And I think you're seeing it in the US where Twitter had NFL Thursdays a couple of years ago, and now Amazon has NFL Thursdays. And if you go to Amazon.com in the US on Thursday, they're playing the game right there on Amazon.com, right above the toilet paper or hangers that you want to buy. And I think unless broadcasters, yesterday, I heard a lot of kind of nervousness around FANG, which we call in the US, but here I guess GAFAN. There's a lot of nervousness around it, but unless broadcasters evolve and kind of embrace the same kind of technology that the GAFAN have, that I think it's going to end up becoming a reality. Right?
But from a cross-screen perspective, surely it's a good thing, right? Amazon delivering it all via IP, so you can track reach frequency very easily. Jay, what do you think?
I think you have to go back to the user experience, and if Amazon playing at the center of their homepage is the best place for that content to be, then fair enough, right, across devices. But I wouldn't, you've seen YouTube, the growth in YouTube watches happen on the big screen, right? That is their single biggest growth device over the last couple of years. I think people respect the device being the TV at home for quality content. And I think that you have to, no matter which way it's distributed, you have to go back and think of how does a user really want to absorb this? If they're on the go, is there some level of convenience? And I think from my point of view, broadcasters should keep doing what broadcasters are best at, right? Delivering high quality content and making sure that distribution channels are open enough. I think what will come, and you've seen BBC do this, you're seeing some of the other sort of broadcasters in the UK making you sign on so they can understand the consumption habit. Hopefully they're taking that information back and saying, well, actually we should make our VOD proposition on desktop devices much better. And then, at the same time, that helps them to drive an analytics piece. Now that still is in silos, but there are a number of interesting ways. We don't have to measure it in exactly the same way we do digital. We don't have to do it the same way that we do a wider campaign study. We can start thinking a little bit more creatively around what do I do holdouts, because that's actually a great start from effectiveness, right? How do I get a control audience that I can really start to measure the incremental effects of my advertising? And I think that's where some of these tools can help, but also where broadcasters need to educate themselves on what are the solutions that people want to implement, what are the questions that some of the advertisers are trying to answer, and then try and find that middle ground between what are we really good at and how can we get help along the way.
I don't disagree with anything you've said, but I do think there's another element to it, which is from a trading perspective, right? Like, I think historically, and some of the examples that we've used today are actually quite interesting. These type of programming commanded a lot of attention at the same time.
Yeah.
And time shift viewing is actually changing that. And so when I think about it, from a brand perspective, right? Like, do I actually want to pay that much money for an event that now is being potentially not seen by that scale of people at that particular point in time? So there is a trading conversation that has to come into this as well, because most of the pricing around these type of rights is still based on a notion that people will sit in front of the telly and watch it at the same time as everyone else. And for brands to actually be forced or encouraged to pay a price when in reality that doesn't happen, it's challenging. So I do think, to your point around the models, right? I think some of the models are still relatively archaic and haven't yet aligned with how people's consumption habits are evolving. And that's a challenge, because when you have the likes of Amazon or Facebook or Google coming into the space and actually challenging, because they have deeper pockets, right? And making that content accessible to a brand in a much more cost-effective way, then you have to wonder, right, if there's anything that we're not doing quite right from a broadcaster perspective at a trading level as well.
David, do you get that? I mean, obviously you have linear and you have on demand. Is there people kind of questioning the value of what you're commanding or trying to command for linear broadcasts?
I don't think questioning it in the way that Ruth has just questioned it. If you're in trading conversations, then I don't think it's questioned. I think people understand the power of TV, and that's pretty much a given. I don't think that most broadcasters are entering an annual trading conversation selling TV. They're kind of saying where their share position is, and they're talking about product innovation. Power of TV is taken for granted. And I think you're seeing there is genuine innovation in the TV marketplace. Cross-platform and, technology like Samba, addressable with AdSmart. Everyone is ploughing money into direct-to-consumer offers and direct-to-consumer propositions. I think there's a lot of innovation there. I think the difference, and I think this is the challenge for TV, and I think this is kind of what you're alluding to, is the Googles, the Facebooks and the Amazons of this world are probably just that much better at linking it through to an end sale, which with advertising, ultimately we're trying to shift goods for people. And I think those guys have got that, they're far further down that journey than any broadcaster, frankly. And when I think about, I think Sky are very good at it in the UK because it's signed in and they can prove effectiveness of TV advertising by looking at what audiences have bought. And it's a pretty smart service, but it's a bit clunkier than anything you're going to get from a Google, frankly.
Well, I mean, I think David's actually hit it on the spot, where Google and Facebook are doing a really good job in telling the story that they want to tell. So they're talking about last touch attribution. So you might have seen the ad 10 times across television and all these other mediums, but Google or Facebook gets the credit because they're telling you that story about last touch attribution, while TV hasn't been able to prove the business outcomes as easily. And that's one of the things that we're actually using our technology to do in the US is show that kind of path to conversion. And the reality is that TV actually performs really well, but they're not getting the credit that they deserve because Google and Facebook are telling a different story.
Yeah, and I think we saw it in a lot of panels yesterday. Marketeers know the value of TV. They know what happens when they take their brands off TV. And so they know that TV is pretty front and central to major brand success. And the benefit of cross-platform and technology integration like you guys provide is that we can put TV into that mix, that multi-screen campaign includes TV, and that's something that the tech companies don't have. Clearly they want to get into that space, but they don't have it. And I think TV needs to get better at telling that story of the most important screen is the TV screen.
So Ruth, I mean, on that point about ad effectiveness and so on, and kind of choosing between the different channels, what data would you find most useful now that isn't available?
Well, I mean, I think it's not so much about data availability, it's quite the opposite. I think we're flooded by data, and it's actually very difficult to figure out what is valuable data and what isn't. And so I think a lot of the work that I do with the teams is actually approach it more from a less is more point of view, and really look at what the brief demands, right?
Okay.
And it's just, to give you a very simple example, like, today, if we wanted to access data about location, about behaviors, about what they have purchased recently, the data is there. The problem is that data is sitting in all of these different places, and it doesn't allow me to create a joined up picture of an individual, right? And it's a very dangerous place because then you operate on stereotypes. And when you operate on stereotypes, then you start losing the granularity that we talk about, because you start grouping people and you start doing it based on quite a general bias towards what you think those people are going to do based on how much money they make and whether they, bought an expensive meal last week or not. So I guess from my perspective, where I find, propositions like yours interesting, where the work that we're doing with Finecast and M-Platform is interesting, is when we're able to start taking a more of a test and learn approach and be able to say, I have this hypothesis about my audience, right? Now I have an opportunity to connect it to results, to be able to prove or disprove what we're actually thinking about that audience, and then adjust what I do thereafter, right? And I find it quite interesting in that we talk about optimization as if it is in the realm of digital, but from a TV perspective, our guys have been using the overnights to optimize placements for God knows how long. And so I just think it's a different way of approaching things. But at the end of the day, our job is to try to deliver the best return on the media investment that our clients have. Some data will help us support that, some won't. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to be incredibly ruthless about prioritizing which data is going to help answer that precise question for that one brief. And then take a blank slate, when a new brief comes on board, because every brief will be different.
So, that's quite a change in the way agencies would work. How are you finding getting that across through the teams?
There's huge appetite for that. At the end of the day, when you look at the talent that we have in agencies, they wake up every day because they're passionate about media. They wake up every day because they're passionate about brands, right? They come in because they genuinely want to have an impact on their clients. And I think for them, it is about the work at the end of the day and being proud of that work. And so if this is one way into getting that amazing campaign that will deliver for the client, they're up for it. Of course, it requires a different type of training and a different type of skill set, but that's my job, right, to help them get to that.
Yeah. Jay, Essence are kind of, well, for me, pretty famous for the fact that they're running research on most campaigns whilst they're running. How often are you adjusting campaigns in flight? And when you start bringing in TV into the agency, will you be applying that kind of discipline to that media?
So I guess we think about measurement in three different levels. We think about the campaign by campaign, what KPIs right, guiding the client through that journey, and then how do we measure success for each element, and what does that look like at campaign level. Then we look at sort of overall marketing goals, and then we have a long-term, what we call a learning agenda, which is what do you really want to get out, what's going to move the needle on your business. Then we keep laddering down what moves the needle for that marketing objective, what moves the needle for that level of campaign, right? What are we trying to achieve? So we try and embed that all the way through our thinking when we think about measurement. It is not, can I justify this investment within TV, or can I justify this investment in banners or online video? Actually, what we're doing is saying, okay, what do the combination of these things do, and how do I prove it? And I think that the way that we will approach TV, I think it's a longer journey for some of the reasons that we've touched on, will be in that same fashion of how do we prove the value of TV Plus, or is it TV? Is it the creative on TV? Isolate the particular components that make up our media buy, and then start to work forward from that and take that, move it on, iterate it, evolve it, and keep moving. So,
and I think, just to add to that, I think that it's really important that broadcasters are really interested in working with agencies to do that proof work and to work out what data we have that could help prove that. I think the challenges then are what data do we think fits behind walls and what can we release? Yeah. And I think that in many ways is the biggest challenge. And my personal interest is how do we bring some of those walls down to work in a much more open fashion with agencies to deliver those proof points. Some of that data is quite hard because it might be related to subscriber data, but I always think there's a way through it. But I think we have to work in partnership to deliver that. Otherwise, I think TV companies and agencies actually have a shared ambition to not let everything go to the duopoly. And so we have to work together to develop TV and to develop the proof points.
So if you've got two agencies here, what one thing would you want from them?
I think genuinely it's that. So it's that when we do campaigns, that we think about proof points from the very beginning, that if we think about optimization as we go along, how would we manage that? TV is very good at what it does, right? TV delivers huge campaigns, big money against good audiences and delivers good effectiveness. But when you start moving it into other platforms, then I think questions start getting asked about why is it there? Is it generating reach? Is it generating any extra effect? How does it connect with my other marketing? What can I deduplicate that video reach with other video campaigns that I'm doing? And I think TV companies have been fairly reticent to get into that space because I think they're nervous about reach. Where is that going to say that I don't have incremental reach, or does my video work less hard than online video? And I don't think we should be scared of that. I think we should be working together to do that work together.
I think you should be proud of your content because of the proliferation of video. I'm going to say it in video. Across all sites, apps, and the likes, a lot of it's crap and shouldn't be there, and definitely shouldn't have ads on it. Right? It's too short. So I think just nailing that down. It may not be the absolute number of audiences which you can't compete with. It may not be some of the measurement pieces, but I think it's what you do best. Like continue pushing the content and work with partnerships with the agencies and brands to really hammer that home. For me, it's turning that trading conversation into a partnerships conversation. Right? It's not about rates. It's not about hammering down or trying to push up because you've suddenly got a massive bill on your hands for taking broadcasting rights for something. It's connecting the rates with those big questions that you want to answer with your agency partners.
Okay, I'm going to take a pause for asking you guys questions here. So we've got a good mix in the audience of agencies, broadcasters, some other tech companies. Any points, any questions people want to raise and discuss with the panel here? Come on, John.
I think it's been alluded to, certainly was at one of the events before this one, that data companies set top box will compete with the data that PTV operators have. PTV operators just got themselves to the point where they have return path data, which is very useful to marketers. But that's not going to be a monopoly for much longer. So are we at an inflection point in terms of who has the data?
Aidan might be a good person.
Sorry, I
The pay TV operators have return path data, certainly the ones who have moved forwards quickly, which is very useful to marketers in terms of attribution, showing that someone's been exposed and then doing that, path to purchase. But now there's data coming out of smart TVs. It doesn't have to be related to a set-top box of any kind. So does this sort of democratise the data, if you like, and it kind of weakens the pay TV environment, relatively speaking?
That's a softball. Did you plan that?
I didn't. I think democratization of data is very important. In the U.S., we actually use a combination of our smart TV data, and then we also supplement it with insights that we get from data that's coming out of set-top boxes. Ultimately, I think the important thing is being able to connect that data to business outcomes and to be able to provide the insights to advertisers and also to broadcasters to show that their content and their inventory is delivering value. I think it's only a matter of time before you're going to see kind of insights coming out of that data in Europe as it is in the US.
Any more from the crowd here? Come on, I know it's early. Hey there, gentleman over there. If you could just say your name and where you work as well.
My name is Rory Mills. I work at Mindshare on the planning team. So I was just wondering, say we do get to this place where we can kind of attribute, like really cleverly attribute where the post-click sale came from TV, kind of the last attribution. Do you feel that will give brands a competitive edge, or do you feel that if we can link everything back to a sale, that kind of the landscape will stay the same? Kind of will it give any brand, an advantage if everyone can link? Does that make sense?
Yeah, who wants to take that?
A lot of the research that we do is looking at kind of what we call only both, right? So was this person only exposed on this platform or only exposed on another platform, or were they exposed on both? So I think you really need to look at not just last click, but look at kind of the combination of touches that
I think you've also got to think about, it's not necessarily apples and apples, digital and TV.
Yeah.
So I'm struggling for a better example than the fact that I knew to buy Pampers when I had my first kid, because I'd seen Pampers adverts for 37 years before that child was born, right? That's a 37-year attribution channel, right? It's not going to get measured. So TV's behaving differently. So I think you just have to make sure that we understand that the brands that are getting benefit out of TV are not going to necessarily be shown in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
I think what you see also in the digital space is we move from like the zero-sum game of last click, and you start looking at wider sort of attribution and not just like add an impression in there and hope for the best. You start looking at real touch points. What you see is the bad acting within the digital space starts to go away, right? So significant amounts of retargeting and just pummeling all your money in there, you start to see actually have a zero incremental effect. And I think that with added data, and hopefully we get to a place there at some point, you might actually see some of the bad acting. So whether we're buying a number of TV ads just to prop up some of the GRP numbers, actually, could we just focus on just quality content? Or, you know, with some of the digital stuff, are we planning too much money in programmatic or search? So I think that that hopefully should inform us better. I don't think it will change huge amounts very quickly, but as people start to wise up, I think there'll be shifts in the way that we use these channels rather than the money we plow into them.
Thanks for the question. Any more? All right, how about panellists? Ruth, have you got a question you want to ask? Oh, sorry, who's that? Again, if you just say your name and where you're working from.
I'm Davide from Mediaset Group. It's a question for Ruth and Jason mainly. Yesterday we were talking about common measurement between TV and digital especially. I was wondering, when you run a campaign for a client of yours and you show at the end the result of the campaign, how do you justify the success of the TV compared to digital, apart the usual measurement that TV and digital have, but how do you say to your client, TV work better than digital or digital perform better? So there is a kind of way you already measure the campaign together and you go to the client and say to them, you know, we think this media perform better than the other. That's them.
Yeah. Well, let me just put it out. It's not perfect, right? Because of exactly the point that David just made. It's like apples to oranges in many cases. I think we're starting to see, the notion of bar plus, you know, starting to permeate and think about a much more holistic way of measuring activity across video distribution touch points. But at the end of the day, I think today it's rather, you have to understand the interrelationship of the different mediums, right? So we have, in our case, proprietary tools that allow us to understand, you know, when a spot is on TV, what is the uplift that we see, for example, in search? Can we actually attribute that to that spot having aired at a particular time, etc.? Most of it is based on modeling, because there isn't that seamless thread cutting across everything. And in that we are, you know, by the sheer fact that we are using models, we're taking some leaps of faith. But, you know, to be fair, I think our clients, most of the clients that are asking those tough questions, they understand that the ecosystem isn't perfectly stitched up together to be able to say, you know, A over here cost Z over there. So I think it's about a collaboration with the client, helping them understand how we're going to measure that campaign, whether that makes sense for them as well, and then adapt as we learn more. I don't know if we'll ever get to that perfect measurement across everything, because that would imply that we have solved identity as an issue, right? The fact that you can identify a pair of eyeballs seeing an ad on TV in their home and then actually going to potentially a shop 3 months down the line, and we don't have that type of tracking today. Do we want that type of tracking as a consumer from a privacy perspective? I don't know.
Fair point. Right, we've got just about 3 minutes left, so I just want to wrap up with kind of each of you guys answering this simple question. Jason, starting with you first. If there was one piece of data that would make your working life a whole lot easier, what would it be?
it would be true reach across devices. If I could really understand how a person, not a cookie, not a device, not a household, not the rest of it, then we start to answer the fundamental questions of brand advertising in particular. How many people did I reach, and how many times did I reach them, and is my message good enough ultimately? I think that for me, I mean, unless you're in China where they might get a citizen ID, I don't think that's ever going to happen anywhere. So yeah, I think, but some level of interpreting reach would be much better than where we are now.
Going down the line, Aiden?
I mean, I think right now we're doing a great job on kind of household level data. One piece of data that would make my life easier is probably who's in front of that television, and that's something that our data science team is spending a lot of time working on. Using a combination of heuristics and other data signals to try to get a better understanding of which individual is in front of the television.
Without activating the camera on the TV.
There's some issues around that.
Somebody tried that. David?
I mean, the guys have hit it. It's that. I'll add another layer of complication, which is I would like it to be, let's go for global.
Okay, fair enough. Ruth?
Identity. You're going to hear me talk about identity a lot because I think there's a huge misunderstanding in what is currently possible from a technical perspective. And I'm not even going beyond digital, right? We haven't even answered that for digital in terms of what a person actually means in our space. So for me, anything that can help towards building that identity is incredibly key.
That's pretty much unanimous, isn't it? It's,
Yeah.
who are these people watching and doing stuff and buying things? We're pretty much out of time. Any more questions from the audience at this stage? Okay, well, look, if you could just join me in congratulating the panel. I think that was a very interesting, enlightening debate.